It's conference championship time. It is college football conference championship time. And this is the Talking Sports podcast right here on YouTube. If you're watching us, you're on YouTube. If you are listening to us, you're either on Apple Podcast or Spotify, but it doesn't matter where you are because you're watching or you're listening to the Talking Sports podcast. I'm Peter DiBiasi. College football regular season is over. It was a great 12-game season, 14-week season with 2 byes included. It was awesome. We had chaos like it was 2007. But now the big boys play. Now conference championship comes, and we're going to break it down. But before we do that, make sure you guys follow us on all social media platforms. If you're on X, follow us on social media. If you're on Instagram, follow us there at Talking Sports PD. You can get all our content right there. Please drop us a follow on any social media platform you are on. And as always, we are sponsored by, and this is brought to you by, Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you guys use code TSP for a 100% deposit match up to $100. It is a great fantasy sports website. I use it all the time, as you can see, posting on our social medias. We do our weekly Sunday pick of the day for the early window and the late window. If you followed us last weekend, you hit Brian Thomas Jr. over, Bucky Irving over, cash money, easy money in your pocket. So make sure you guys get on Underdog Fantasy and make sure you guys use code TSP. Okay, the reason you guys are here, we're breaking down the conference championship college football edition. This is not the only episode we are doing when it comes to the playoff or college football in general. We're going to do the conference championship preview right now. Then come December or later into December, we're going to break down the playoffs. We're going to do first down breakdown, quarterfinal breakdown, semifinal breakdown, and national championship breakdown. So the college football content is coming, and it is coming hot right now. So please make sure you guys subscribe so you guys do not miss anything. We're going to break down the Big 12, SEC, Big 10, and ACC championship game. I'm also going to tell you a little bit of what implication this could potentially mean for the college football playoff, but more importantly, break down the game and what we expect to see on Saturday. Because at the end of the day, college football is best when you focus on the game and you do not look at the bigger picture. Group of 5. I said what I was going to break down, but we're going to quickly touch on the group of 5. 2 matchups you're looking for in the group of 5 conference championship. You're looking at Boise State versus UNLV on Friday night, and you're looking again for Tulane versus Army on Friday night. The impact this has on the college football playoff, because I'll touch on that because that's the most important thing here. If Boise State beats UNLV, Boise State's in the college football playoff. If UNLV beats Boise State, UNLV is in the college football playoff. That is probably where we are at. I would love for Army to be in it. I'm a huge Army fan. I would love for Army to be in the college football playoff. But based off the fact that in previous rankings, UNLV was ranked higher than Army, I'm expecting, even if Army beats Tulane in the AAC championship, which would be an incredible season, they would still not do enough to surpass UNLV. So that is kind of where we're at. It's basically the winner of the Mountain West Championship most likely will be in the college football playoff. I'll give you quick predictions there in those 2 games. I like Boise State and I like Army. So most likely Boise State going to the college football playoff. Big 12 time. Got to get the trusty notes. You know it's important when we get the trusty notes. So Big 12 time. Iowa State, the 10-2 Iowa State taking on the 10-2 Arizona State. What a matchup here. And quickly, what this means for the college football playoff. It means the winner is in, the loser is not, and we're looking at a 1-bid league for the Big 12. So the winner, this game has everything to it. It has 2 teams fighting for their lives, fighting for a chance to get into the college football playoff, fighting for a chance to win the Big 12 title. First off, let's look at Iowa State here. Key wins on the year. Kansas State, you're going to see a similarity. Both teams have wins over Kansas State, and Iowa State beat Iowa earlier in the year. They're 32 points per game. That ranks 30th in the country. They give up 21 points per game. That is 24th in the country. So a top 30 offense and a top 25 defense. They do give up. This is where Iowa State could be vulnerable and where Arizona State could key in on here. Iowa State gives up 173 rushing yards per game. That is 94th in the country. But what they do is they are 20th in takeaways a game, so they force takeaways. Iowa State scares me on the ground, giving up 173 rushing yards per game, which ranks close to 100th in the nation, is very concerning when you flip over to where Arizona State is, and they average 195 rushing yards per game, which is 21st in the country. So we're looking at a very subpar rush defense in Iowa State versus a very elite running game in Arizona State. If you flip over to Arizona State, some of their key wins, Kansas State, similarities. I tried breaking it down and being like, well, if you're trying to compare teams, do they have any common opponents, right? And they both beat Kansas State. But one team scored 24, one team scored 29. It was a very similar how each team won that game. So I couldn't find a takeaway where I was like, this is the edge. This is where I think this team wins based off that matchup. They both beat Iowa State. They both scored well into the 20s. Arizona State, 32 points. And Arizona State earlier in the year, or a couple weeks ago, beat BYU. If you don't know what happened, Arizona State stormed the field a little bit premature there, and they had to run one more play. BYU actually converted that Hail Mary. They were just a couple yards short, but Arizona State on this miraculous run to 10-2 and a chance to make the college football playoff escaped BYU there. They score 32 points per game, so they each average around the same, and they give up 21.5 points per game, right? Like, this is very similar team. Arizona State red zone defense is a little bit worrisome, 76 in red zone defense. And I honestly think if you walked into this game and if you looked at this game, Big 12 championship, and were like, I'm going to flip a coin, and heads is Iowa State and tails is Arizona State. And if it was heads or it was tails, that was your winner, I think you would be okay. These teams are average the same amount of points per game. They give up the same amount of points per game. One team struggles stopping the run. One team struggles in red zone defense. They both beat Kansas State. They're both 10-2. These teams are mirrors of each other. They look exactly the same. Blind recognition both these teams, and both these teams are exactly the same. That's why it was so hard for me to figure out who would win this game and who would come out on top. Arizona State is a slight favorite, about 2.5 right now. I like the upset. I like Iowa State. I think they were hot early. They were leading the Big 12 early. They lose a couple games, and you think they're done. You think they have no chance to get back into this Big 12 title race. Here they go, and then they make it in, right? And then Arizona State is a huge underdog story to finish in the bottom half of the Big 12. Has a chance to win. I think they're a cool story. I like Iowa State in a close game, but like I just said, I think you can make it a coin flip, and I think you could pick whatever heads or tails, sign a team, and go with that prediction. So I like Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. SEC championship game. We got a rematch of a game we saw earlier this year in Austin. We got Texas sitting at 11-1, and we got Georgia sitting at 10-2. Both teams, in my opinion, are locks to make the college football playoff. The winner of this gets a first-round bye, a top 4 seed, and get a first-round bye. The other one will have to play a first-round game. So that's where I think it sits at when it comes to the college football playoff. But let's talk about this game. Texas' best wins they're hard to find, and then this is something that people have criticized Texas with this year, in that their resume is not as good as you might expect when it comes to a Texas team, right? Their best wins recently at Texas A&M and at Vanderbilt, right? Like, they beat Florida, which was a solid win, who's playing better, but at the time they weren't, and there was no DJ Lagway in that game. Like, I don't know if Texas has a signature win. It's Texas A&M who finished 8-4. That's their signature win. But if you look at Texas, they're sitting at 11-1. They did lose to Georgia earlier in the year. They're scoring 34 points per game this year. That's 15th in the country. But their defense is what kind of jumps to me, right? They're giving up 11.7 points per game. That is second in the country. And you might come to me with the fact that their schedule is not as good as it should be. And I get it, but you still play a legit schedule. A&M, Vanderbilt, Florida, Georgia, and you're giving up Michigan early in the year. I know they're not great offensively, but 11.7 opponent points per game, one of the best defenses in the country. But when it comes to why I think Texas could be a little bit concerning in this game, it's the play of Quinn Ewers, right? And I think when Quinn Ewers is on his A game, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. We saw last year in their road to a top 4 seed in a college football playoff berth. They obviously ended up losing to Washington. But I think when you come to Quinn Ewers, when it comes to Quinn Ewers, and we saw in the original matchup against Georgia, his struggles and their turnover issues, I think that's concerning. Like, what Quinn Ewers are we going to get? And I'm going to say that for a couple quarterbacks in these games. What Quinn Ewers are we going to get? They're 87th in giveaways a game, and they're 83rd in penalties a game. That is something that is very concerning. In a game where both these teams are elite, both these teams are so closely together, penalties could be the deciding factor, right? And I think the turnovers in that original matchup against Georgia were the reason Texas lost the game, right? Georgia capitalized on the turnovers. Texas did not capitalize on Georgia's turnovers, and that ended up being the difference, and that led to a Georgia victory. When you flip over to Georgia, they're 10-2. What Georgia are we going to get? Are we going to get the Georgia that we saw against Ole Miss and Alabama? Because if we do, they are going to lose to Texas. Or are we getting the Georgia we saw against Texas in Austin earlier this year, or against Tennessee? Everyone remembers that last week, it's not that long ago, Georgia coming off an 8 overtime victory. And if you look at it, you're like, what Georgia are we going to get? Like, we saw that Georgia first half team. They were getting manhandled at home against a worse opponent in Georgia Tech in a rivalry game, a game that you have to be able to get up for, a game that you should be coming with everything you got. It's a rivalry game, a chance to basically lock up a college football playoff spot, and we saw Georgia get manhandled in the first half. And then they're down double digits with 4.5 minutes left. They claw their way back. They get it to OT, and they win in 8 overtimes. What Georgia are we going to get? They average 32 points per game. That is 28th in the country. They give up 22 points per game. That is 29th in the country. Georgia's finally getting healthy at running back. Robinson's back. Frazier is starting to come along. Will Trevor Etienne play in this game? That is something that has been so mind-boggling to me. And I get it. They've had injuries this year. Their inability to consistently run the ball has hurt them in games against Ole Miss, has hurt them in games against Alabama. And I think that's been a huge issue. And that has led to a struggle with Carson Beck. I talked about Quinn Ewers' inconsistencies. How about Carson Beck's inconsistencies? Carson Beck last year, heading into the season, was a guaranteed first-round pick. He is not at that moment. Obviously, things can change. He can play his way back into the first round, but we have seen a very hot and cold Carson Beck. I think there's a couple reasons. I think their O-line's not great. They got manhandled against Ole Miss. I think their running game has not been consistent. They've dealt with a ton of injuries at the running back position. And then their receivers are not as good as they were last year. And it makes sense, right? You lose Ladd McConkey, who's having a great year with the Chargers, and you lose Brock Bowers, who's having a great year with the Raiders. You are going to take a step back because it is so hard to replicate that production. So I think that has really hurt Carson Beck, and then his turnovers issues, right? Against Alabama and Ole Miss combined, he had 4 interceptions. Against Texas the first time, he had 3 interceptions. In those 3 games against high major teams, he had 7 interceptions. It didn't cost him against Texas because Texas matched the turnovers. I don't know if that's going to happen in this one. But if you flip to the Tennessee game, a game that they won, a game that they dominated in Athens, Carson Beck had no turnovers. The key to the game for this Georgia Bulldogs, run the ball, no turnovers for Carson Beck. I think they get that. I like Georgia to win in a dogfight, a low-scoring game. I like Georgia to pull off this win. They're slight dogs, but I like Georgia in a close one, low-scoring, to win the SEC championship game. As always, we are sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you guys follow us on social media, and make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Let's keep on moving. We got 2 more games. I got to flip the page. Whew, I got to take a deep breath here. It's a lot of talking. We're talking about the Big 12, the Big 10. We got the 12-0 Oregon Ducks taking on the 11-1 Penn State Nittany Lions. Let's start with Oregon, right? Let's start with the college football playoff outlook. Both teams are in the playoff, in my opinion, right? Both teams have locked themselves up a spot in the 12-team playoff. The winner obviously gets a bye. The loser probably falls to 5 or 6 and hosts a first-round game at their home stadium. So that is the outlook when it comes to the college football playoff. Oregon's best wins: Ohio State, Boise State, and Illinois. Oregon's 36 in points per game. They're They average 36 points per game. That is 9th in the country. And they give up 16 points per game. That is 9th in the country. They are top 10 offense. They are top 10 defense. Dillon Gabriel has been so consistent at the quarterback position. Doesn't turn the ball over. Heisman frontrunner, makes the plays, reads great defenses, and is a veteran leader. He has played a ton of college football. Played a ton of college football at UCF. Played a ton of college football at Oklahoma. He goes over to Oregon and he brings that same attitude, that same leadership, and that has led them to a 12-0 record and a Big Ten championship berth in their first year in the conference. They're led by two elite guys on the outside, Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. And Tez Johnson's back being healthy. This team is different when Tez Johnson plays. Just watch it. This team is different when Tez Johnson plays. Jordan James leads the running back. Opponent rushing yards a game. They only give up 118 yards per game. That is 23rd in the country. But this stems to Dan Lanning, right? I think Dan Lanning learned a lot last year. They lost twice to Michael Penix in Washington. They missed out on a college football playoff berth. They missed out on a Pac-12 title in their last year in the Pac-12. I think this leans a lot on Dan Lanning, and I think his experience as a college football coach. And I think he's ready to take that step there. And I think led by Dillon Gabriel, you have elite receivers on the outside. The defense has been great this year. They can get after the quarterback at will. I think this Oregon team is super loaded in multiple positions. And I think stepping back to Dillon Gabriel and his consistency and his leadership and his veteranship, I think has helped this Oregon team move on to 12-0. Let's flip to Penn State. Penn State sitting at 11-1. Not a lot of great wins on this resume right now. Their best win is Illinois, and that one loss is at Ohio State. They're averaging 33 points per game. That is 27th in the country, and they're giving up only 14 points per game. That is 4th in the country. So we have a top 5 defense in Penn State and a top 10 defense in Oregon. A low-scoring game I could totally see. I talked about what Quinn Ewers are we getting? What Carson Beck are we getting? What Drew Aller are we getting? And it's not the turnovers or it's not the miscues when it comes to Drew Aller. It's the big play. Can Drew Aller, we didn't see it last year. We didn't see it against Ohio State. Can he make the play when it is needed? And I think that is something that has really hindered this Penn State team. It hindered them last year. They finished 10-2. It hindered and they lost to Michigan and Ohio State. They're 11-1. They lost to Ohio State. And the only reason they're in this game is because Ohio State got upset last weekend against Michigan. Because if it wasn't for that, we would be talking about a rematch in an Ohio State versus Oregon game right now. And I think what Drew Aller are we getting? This guy's going to have to make big plays. I think it's a low-scoring game. I really do. But even in a low-scoring game, your quarterback has to make plays, has to come up in the clutch. So I think that's a huge impact. And James Franklin, right? I think James Franklin's a really good coach. He's probably not an elite or a great coach. That is the issue. They couldn't win big games last year. Lost both their big games to Michigan and Ohio State. They couldn't win a big game in the regular season. They lost their one big one against Ohio State. They finished 11-1. He struggled against top 10 teams. He struggled against top 5 teams. He struggled against highly ranked opponents in his tenure at Penn State. They've beaten everyone they're supposed to, and they've lost to everyone when they've been underdog. They're underdog again against Oregon. Can this team show up? Can James Franklin win a big game? This is a big game. It's a big game because you get a Big Ten title. You knock off an undefeated team that's number 1 in the country, and you secure yourself a top 4 bid and a bye in the college football playoff. Penn State's key to the game, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. This team is different when they can run the ball with Singleton and Allen. If you go back to the Ohio State game, they were unable to get anything going on the ground against Ohio State. They average 194 rushing yards a game. That's 23rd in the country. A good run defense versus a great rushing game. I think Penn State has to lean on Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in order to win this game. And can James Franklin win a big game? Can Drew Aller make enough big-time plays in this game? Prediction time. I like Oregon to win a low-scoring contest here. I think it's time for Dan Lanning to win another big game. He saw what he did last year, losing twice to Washington, losing the Pac-12 championship to Washington. I think Oregon takes this one in a low-scoring game. I also just don't think Penn State has enough firepower. I don't think they have good enough quarterback play, and I don't trust James Franklin in a big game. Before we get on to the ACC championship game, make sure you guys drop a like, make sure you guys comment, and make sure you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let me know what you guys think. Who do you got in the Big 12 championship? Who do you have in the SEC, Big 10, or ACC? Let me know. I really appreciate it. If you're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, make sure you guys follow us on all those platforms. ACC. We got the 11-1 SMU Mustangs taking on the 9-3 Clemson Tigers. I will talk about the playoff outlook quickly here before we get to the actual game. SMU wins, they're in. They get a top 4 bye, and they get a bye in the first round. ACC becomes most likely a one bid league. I don't expect Miami to backdoor their way in after an upset loss last week to Syracuse. This is where it gets interesting. If Clemson wins, they secure themselves an automatic bid to the college football playoff. And does SMU backdoor their way into maybe a 9, 10, or 11 spot? I think they should. If you are a 2-loss team from a high major conference, and they would be a 2-loss team from a high major conference, they would be 11-2. The only loss to be in the ACC championship game to Clemson and to BYU earlier in the year. I think they deserve. So I think if Clemson wins, Clemson obviously gets an automatic bid. I think SMU should get in. If SMU wins, I think ACC becomes a one-bid league. I don't expect Miami to backdoor their way in. Flip over to SMU right here. Best wins, Louisville and Pitt, and they lost to BYU. Haven't played anybody super elite. I think Louisville's a really solid team. Pitt kind of fell off towards the end, started 7-0 and routed off 5 straight losses to end the year. They score 37 points per game, 6th in the country. They give up 20.9 points per game, 23rd in the country. They're 7th in yards per pass. This team throws the ball. This team is a high-scoring offense. They're 21st in passing yards per game. Kevin Jennings did not start the year at quarterback. They made the quarterback switch, and all of a sudden, SMU goes from maybe a 9-win team to a team in their first year in the ACC, competing for an ACC championship game, have not lost a single ACC game. Their only loss was an out-of-conference loss to BYU, who ended up being a really good team and finishing 10-2, just missing out on a Big 12 playoff berth, or Big 12 championship berth. Kevin Jennings has been the key to this team. This team has been elite offensively. Like I said, 6 points per game, 7th in yards per pass, 21st in passing yards a game. And then if you flip over to the defensive side of the ball, they're 92nd in passing yards per game, only giving up 240. I think this SMU team has come alive, has earned themselves an at-large bid, in my opinion. They have earned themselves an at-large bid, but now they earned themselves a chance to get a bye, get an automatic bid, and not leave up their decision to anybody in the committee. And I think Kevin Jennings has been the main reason. He's turned an absolute elite season in after not starting the year and after having struggle at quarterback position earlier in the year for SMU. Credit to them for making the move, and I think Kevin Jennings has turned into an elite quarterback. Clemson, 9-3. When I planned this episode out last week, I expected to be talking about an SMU Miami game. Miami goes into Syracuse and goes into New York and loses a game because they just couldn't defend. And Mario Cristobal probably should be a little bit of ashamed of himself. The fact that he had Cam Ward and they're most likely going to miss out on a college football playoff berth because they could not defend a lick. That's an issue. That's a culture issue that they have in Miami, and that is a major issue that Miami has to deal with. They're going to finish 10-2. Most likely, unless something changes, finish on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoff. And with Cam Ward and with that offense, that is a disappointment, and that is almost a fireable offense, in my opinion, when it comes to Mario Cristobal. That is bad if you're a Miami fan. There is no business you should go into Syracuse and lose that game with the chance to basically secure a college football playoff berth, secure a spot in the ACC championship game. That was disappointing. Clemson, 9-3, losses to Georgia, Louisville, and South Carolina. Only one ACC loss, which is the reason they're here. Georgia out of conference loss, South Carolina out of conference loss. Their best win, none. None. This Clemson team has no business being in the ACC championship game. But because Miami faltered and no one else in the ACC kind of stepped forward, it was a 3-team race the whole year. They're in this game, and they have a chance to lock up a bid to go to the college football playoff. Every time Clemson's won 9 games against teams that they're better than. Anytime they've played a team that is similar in skill set or a little bit better, they've gotten absolutely boat raced. Georgia didn't even look like the same team. Louisville comes into Death Valley and punches you in the mouth and you lose to Louisville. And then South Carolina blowing the lead late, turning the ball over in the red zone with a chance to tie the game or even win the game. But they have another chance. Redemption story. They have another chance. They're 19th in points per game, averaging 34 a game. They're 32nd in opponent points per game, averaging 22. Cade Klubnik has been super inconsistent. He's been good against the teams that they're better than and has struggled against the teams that he's not. He was much better in the South Carolina game. Used his legs really well. But against Georgia struggled, and against Louisville they struggled. They got run out of their own building against Louisville. And I thought they were dead to rights when it came to a chance to play in this ACC championship game or even make a college football playoff. But here they are. They have to lean on the run game. Phil Maffa has been really good for them, but they don't use them enough. This was an eye-popping stat that I marked when it comes to Clemson. They're 37th in the country in rushing yards a game. They're a pretty good rushing attack. They're 80th in rushes a game. They're a top 40 rushing team in the country, 37th, but they're 80th in rushes a game, rushing attempts a game. Run the dang ball, and that is something that they have not used. And the fact that Cade Klubnik has been inconsistent, they're not elite at the receiver position. You would think they would lean on their elite running back, and they have not. They have not. They should be top 40, top 30 in rushes a game, and they're not. And that is a bad issue with Garrett Riley at OC and Dabo Swinney. They are number 3 in the turnover margin per game, so they do force turnovers, and they don't turn the ball over a ton. That has been keeping Clemson in some of these games, and the reason they're 9-3. But it comes down to the fact for me in this ACC championship game, the fact that Clemson, every time they've played a team up to their level or a little better than them, they've lost. Georgia, Louisville, and South Carolina. So when it comes to my ACC championship prediction, I am going with SMU to finish 12-1, win the ACC championship game, and lock up a bye in the college football playoff. Yeah, I just don't think Clemson has enough. So run it through again for everybody at home. If you're an Apple Podcast, we have Iowa State beating Arizona State. We have Georgia beating Texas. We have Oregon beating Penn State. SMU beating Clemson. And then in the group of 5, Boise State beating UNLV and Army beating Tulane in the notable group of 5 games. That is going to do it for us. If you're on social media, make sure you guys follow us at Talking Sports PD on Instagram or X. We post a ton. I really appreciate it if you guys would drop a follow, drop a like on all our social media posts. It would mean a lot. And as always, we are sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you guys use code TSB for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Get on Underdog Fantasy and make sure you guys use code TSP. That is going to do it for our college football. That is going to do it for our college football conference championship preview. We have a ton of college football content coming your way. Make sure you guys enjoy the weekend. We'll see you when it comes to the playoff time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and thank you.